Whilst this video is in itself a standalone video on Hitler's years in Vienna, it is also part of a larger series. So if you haven't seen the first video in the series and you wish to view it in order, maybe watch my video on Hitler's childhood first. I'll make a playlist on my channel homepage. When we left Adolf last time, his mother, Clara Hitler, had just passed away after a long and painful battle with breast cancer. Dr. Bloch, the family doctor known as the poor people's doctor in the local area, claimed he had never seen anyone as distraught as the young Adolf when his mother passed. His life would now totally change forever. Both of his parents were dead, and at the age of 18, he now had to find his way in the world. First of all, a thank you to my Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. With their support, I will at some point be able to make these videos full time, so that they will be both more frequent and better quality. Even the $2 tier helps more than you can imagine, so if you do happen to have a few spare dollars laying around a month, please consider clicking the link in the description. Second, a little obvious disclaimer. Just because I am making a biography series on Adolf Hitler does not mean I support or endorse any of his actions or views. This is a non-political channel, and all my work is purely for historical purposes. Thank you. Clara Hitler was buried on the 23rd of December 1907, 2 days after her death. It was a foggy and damp day, and after a short service, she was taken across the Danube River by horse carriage to be buried alongside her husband, Alois. Adolf watched in a long black overcoat with a black top hat. He looked even paler than normal, which is saying something, and he wore a serious, composed expression. On Christmas Eve, it was now time to settle the rest of the medical bill. Dr. Bloch had kindly allowed Adolf to pay only 59 of the 359 kronen owed to him beforehand, and the rest of the bill was left for later. This was no small bill, but it was fairly reasonable for the time, considering Dr. Bloch made 77 home and office visits and 47 treatments, which could be extremely expensive. Still, however, the bill was over 10% of Clara's estate. Adolf shook Bloch's hand to thank him profusely before telling him, "I shall be forever grateful to you." He meant this. Dr. Bloch, a Jew, was afforded special favours and exemptions during Hitler's reign later on. Hitler spent the rest of the day alone rather than with his family. They were pressuring him to quit his dream of becoming an artist, and he was fixed on escaping to Vienna. He was determined to prove them wrong and fulfill the dream. He wasn't happy to do this alone though. He set to work on convincing August Kubizek, his best friend, to come too. He urged him to quit his job working for his father at an upholstery shop and come with him. August was all for it. He wanted to become a musician as much as Adolf wanted to become an artist after all. Convincing August's parents was quite a task, but he proved capable. They allowed August to go to Vienna for a trial period. Clara's estate was worth at least 3,000 kronen, but Adolf and his brother, Alois Jr., very generously decided to give their share of the inheritance to the girls. Adolf's went to Angela, and Alois went to Paula. Adolf was now left with just an orphan's pension. On the 17th of February 1908, at the age of 18, he set off to Vienna to chase his dream. He stepped into his third-class cabin on the train and shouted out the window to August as he departed, telling him to join him soon. After 5 hours, he arrived in Vienna for the third time. After only a day there, he wrote back to his friend, "Dear friend, eagerly await news of your coming. Write soon and definitely, so that I can get everything ready to receive you in style. All Vienna is waiting. As we said to start with, you can stay with me. We can see later how we get on. Piano to be had here in the government pawn shop for as little as 50 to 60 florins. Well, many greetings to you, also to your esteemed parents from your friend, Adolf Hitler. Once again, please come soon." 5 days later, August arrived, and Adolf was so happy to see him that he ran towards him and kissed him on the cheek at the train station. They arrived at Adolf's tiny apartment he was renting. Sketches were scattered everywhere, and he was using newspaper as a tablecloth. He pulled out his meagre food supply, milk, sausage, and bread, before August shoved these aside and pulled out roast pork, fresh baked buns, cheese, jam, and coffee. Hitler shouted out, "Yes, that's what it is to have a mother." Adolf insisted on taking August on a tour of the city immediately after dinner, and he ran him around on that foggy evening, showing him all the sights, the opera houses, the churches, and all the other landmarks Vienna has to offer. August was nowhere near as enthusiastic as Adolf, however, after the long journey, and his bed made up by the landlady on the floor felt like a bed fit for a king when they finally got home at midnight after his long day of travel. Within 2 days, August took his exam at the music academy and passed. A few days later, August had a female friend from his new school over, and when she left, Adolf went into one of his tirades, this time about the senselessness of women studying. August describes Adolf at the time as being unbalanced, and that he would fly into a temper at the slightest thing. Nothing August ever did seemed to suit Adolf, and their life together was very hard. Everywhere Adolf looked, he saw people working against him and trying to bring him down. The hidden reason for this was Adolf's bitter rejection after his own exam. He went into another rant. A lot of old-fashioned, fossilized civil servants, bureaucrats, devoid of understanding, stupid lumps of officials, the whole academy ought to be blown up, he said. When asked what he would do now, Hitler calmly replied, "Never mind." August's recollections should be taken with a lot of trust. These aren't some post-war hit piece. This is from August's own recollections of events. He loved Hitler and never betrayed him until the day he died, even after the events of the Second World War. He said, "Even though I, a fundamentally unpolitical individual, had always kept aloof from the political events of the period, which ended forever in 1945. Nevertheless, no power on earth could compel me to deny my friendship with Adolf Hitler." Several times Adolf would go up to the door of a noted stage designer with his portfolio in hand, but would always turn around at the last moment. For what reason, it cannot be said for sure. Perhaps he was self-conscious of his work. Adolf's Vienna dream sounded more like a nightmare at times. He would go hungry for days, not eating a single thing. When he did eat, it was mostly just milk and bread and butter. He kept a lid on his feelings, but would occasionally say to August, "Isn't this a dog's life?" or other similar statements. The little money he did have from his orphan's pension, he would spend to attend the opera several times a week, paying extra to stand in the promenade, where no women were allowed. All they were after was flirting, he said. They also got into many concerts free of charge, as Kubizek got tickets from being in the academy. Hitler's vision of the city soured slowly over time too. A country boy used to homogenous little villages was plunged into a city of mass diversity. Not in the sense you'd think of it today, obviously, but of European diversity. One contemporary reporter said it had been swamped for long centuries by the Slavs, the Magyars and the Italians. This town, they say, has no longer a drop of German blood. In the city at the time, there was a Bohemian theatre, an Italian opera, singers from France, and clubs for the Polish. In some cafes, there would be Czech, Polish, or Hungarian newspapers, but not one in German. It was very different to what Adolf was used to, and it began to disgust him. The inequality was rife. Rich bankers would live in their luxurious mansions just minutes away from dingy middle-class streets, and then a few minutes more away would be even worse conditions, filled with the homeless. He would rant endlessly about the sick injustice of it all. He would randomly go to view the housing conditions of the workers, and once even disappeared for 3 entire days before returning and announcing that the tenements will be demolished, and proceeded to work all night on designs for a model workers' settlement. That spring, August went home for the Easter holidays. He wrote back to his friend that he was sick with conjunctivitis and that he might be losing his sight. Adolf spent Easter in Vienna alone. He wrote to August, "It filled me with deep sorrow to hear that you are going blind. You will hit more and more wrong notes, misread the music, and end up blind while I slowly go deaf." On his return, August grew disillusioned with their squalid little apartment and pushed Adolf into going on trips to the countryside together. They would walk in the woods or take steamer rides on Sundays. Whilst out on these adventures, they began attracting a lot of female attention. At first, August thought it was him, but eventually it became obvious that Hitler was the one having that effect on the women. Adolf did not feel the same way as them though. In accordance with his Catholic upbringing, he claimed that he must keep the flame of life pure, and that man and woman should save themselves for marriage so that they can produce healthy children for the good of the nation. He would spend hours ranting about the darker side of sexuality too. Prostitutes and their customers repulsed him, and he couldn't believe that people would fall into such depravity, one time even wanting to see the filth for himself. He and August took a walk through a road of dimly lit houses, watching men talk to girls at the doors, enter, and then the lights go out before returning home to subject August to another of his intense rants on the topic. August went on that year to complete his exams with excellent grades, and he conducted the end-of-term concert. He was personally congratulated by the director of the Academy of Music with Hitler by his side. The jealousy Adolf probably felt at this time can hardly be imagined, watching his best friend fulfill his dream with flying colours while his own hadn't even got off the ground. August returned home for summer, but insisted on paying his half of the rent still, even saying that when he returned he would get a position as a violinist to bring in some extra money so that he could pay more than his share. Adolf felt very gloomy alone without his friend. After 2 weeks of no letters, he wrote to his friend saying, "Dear friend, perhaps you already have guessed why I have not written for so long. The answer is very simple. I could think of nothing to tell you, or what would have interested you particularly. I am still in Vienna, and here I stay. Alone here, for Frau Zachary's is at her brother's. Still, I am pretty well in my hermit life. There is only one thing I miss. Up till now, Frau Zachary's has always drawn me out of bed in the morning. I have been used to getting up very early in order to work, whereas now I have to look after myself. Is there no news from Linz? Otherwise, I don't know any news. Only this morning, I caught a murderous stream of bedbugs that soon after was swimming dead in my blood, and now my teeth are chattering with heat. I think such cold days as this year are rare in summer." Hitler spent the rest of this month sat in his bug-infested room. His life was as dull as could be. He returned to his family in Spittal for a holiday, but was subjected to the usual speeches urging him to take up a normal profession rather than his fantasy of becoming an artist. Obviously, their pleas fell on deaf ears, and after a fallout over the whole thing, he set off back to Vienna for the 4th time. He was now effectively cut off from his family, or any support he might have gotten from them. Upon arriving, he applied to the Art Academy again, submitting his drawings. A year's worth of his hard work sat in that bug-infested room. He was dismissed immediately, and not even allowed to take the test. That's how badly his drawings were regarded. Things weren't looking good for Adolf. He was running out of funds too, and had to downgrade to an even worse apartment. When Kubizek arrived back in Vienna, Hitler was nowhere to be seen at the train station as usual. The next time Kubizek visited Linz, he asked Adolf's older sister for his new Vienna address. She replied crossly that she didn't even know herself. She then began berating him for helping lead Hitler down this path of self-destruction. August defended his friend relentlessly, and then left as the conversation got extremely unpleasant. Hitler spent his birthday that year all alone in his disgusting apartment. He had cut off Kubizek. He no longer spoke to his family. He hated anything that reminded him of home. He resented Kubizek for his success with his dream, whilst his own dream had failed miserably. He lived a horrible, solitary existence, rarely leaving the bubble of his apartment. Very few people interacted with him during this time, but one was the cashier of the Café Kubata, a nearby restaurant. She was deeply impressed by Hitler. He would sit there, very reserved, serious, and quiet, reading books, unlike the rest of the rowdy young men. She would always give him an extra large portion of his favourite meal, a meatless, flour-based dish. By late summer 1909, Adolf had officially almost reached the end of his resources. He downscaled apartments yet again. He lasted here for around a month before he left this last apartment. He disappeared into the underworld of poverty and homelessness. For the next 3 months of his life, he wandered around and lived the life of a tramp. He was either unable or unwilling to work. He told no one about his situation. He just gritted his teeth and bore the shame. He would sleep on park benches or in people's doorways. In October, winter came early, and he had to find shelter indoors any place he could. The homeless shelters he would sometimes end up in were intolerable. The cold sometimes seemed preferable to hearing the noises of other homeless men shouting, screaming, beating their wives, or just in general being troublesome alcoholics. He ended up relying on the church for help, and he would queue up for soup every morning at 9 a.m. Before the end of the year, he had almost no clothes left. He had sold them. With just a light jacket to protect him from the cold, he headed to the outskirts of town. The journey took him 2.5 hours. Here was a shelter for those who had nowhere else to go. They were expected to help with the housework or do the gardening to earn their keep, but otherwise, anyone could stay here. It was spotlessly clean and much better than the last few months had been for him. He got a card entitling him to a month's stay. To Hitler, it felt kind of like a prison. He would have to shower in public with the others, and they would be herded like prisoners to dinner time in the dining hall. At this establishment, he met a man whom he got on with fabulously well. He told Hitler about his years in Berlin, which obviously Hitler found incredibly fascinating. His name was Reinhold Hanitsch, and he too was an aspiring artist. He helped Hitler survive that winter. They went across town to find food together, and would do odd jobs like shoveling snow to make a little money. He tried begging, but this wasn't for him, and he had no luck. Adolf's newfound friend simply couldn't understand why a man so talented and educated was allowing himself to be in such a situation. Adolf simply replied, "I don't know myself." Hanitsch decided to help Hitler out, and the duo came up with a scheme. Hitler would use his artistic skills to draw postcards, and Hanitsch would sell them at bars. The proceeds would be split 50-50. Adolf had sold all his equipment, but was convinced by his new friend to write home, after all this time, to ask for some money. His aunt Joanna obliged and mailed him a 50 kronen banknote. In early 1910, Hitler moved to a different hostel across the river. His new friend did not come with him. This place seemed luxurious, even to the local middle class. The food was cheap, but good quality, and there was a large, brightly lit dining room. If the food couldn't be afforded, that was no problem, and there was another area for people to cook up their own cheaper food that they had found elsewhere. There was a gigantic reading room, as well as games rooms and a writing room. The catch was that this place was extremely strict, the way the director liked it. No rowdy or overly loud behaviour, and everyone had to be out during the day. Most men in there were sincere, decent individuals who were down on their luck, like Hitler. Only a few were thieves who quickly found themselves expelled. After 4 days, Hitler's new best friend joined him. He had attempted to be a servant, but 4 days was enough for him. The two got straight to work. Hitler would churn out postcards or larger paintings, and they would sell fairly easily. The two no longer went to bed hungry. They had by no means escaped the despair of poverty, but they could now afford to feed themselves with the proceeds. In the writing room, Hitler was in his element. He would spend all day producing his works, and also developed another future interest of his, politics. Heated political discussions would erupt, and every time he heard them kick off, he would be out of his chair and flying in, getting his views across. He would denounce the Social Democrats and praise the Christian Socialist Party, fending off any who tried to debate him. He was the star of the show. Whenever Hanich would return and come to see Hitler off busy with these shouting matches, he would have to escort him back to his painting set and get him back to work. Adolf's intense love for politics grew and grew. He would spend hours in the House of Deputies listening to the debates and return to the writing room for his own debates. He attacked the Social Democrats for their atheism and would talk of how he wished for Austria and Germany to be united as one. He was distracted from his work more and more. He couldn't keep up with the orders like he used to, and Hanich was getting frustrated with him. As soon as Hanich would leave, Adolf would just start reading the newspapers or getting in his usual debates. Eventually, he made an attempt to leave. He and a friend named Newman often talked of moving to Germany. They set off on their journey, but somehow didn't. They never left the city and ended up spending 4 days looking around Vienna at places like Hitler's favourite museums, and then returned back to the Mannheim hostel. Hitler enjoyed his first taste of freedom for a while, and as a result became lazy, only doing enough work to finance another escapade, and Hanich had enough. Their partnership was over. That autumn of 1910, he made another attempt at getting into the Academy of Fine Arts. He turned up with a massive collection of his paintings. Again, he was denied, but was told that the paintings were executed with remarkable architectural precision. He returned to the hostel and tried going at his previous work alone, but couldn't sell anywhere near as much without his partner. Out of hope, Hitler reached out to his family for money. Aunt Joanna pitied him and sent him a considerable sum of her 3,800 kronen life savings. She died only a few months later. Around the same time, Hitler handed over his orphan's pension to his sister, stating that he could do without it. Hitler continued doing what he had been doing, painting the days away in his writing room. He lived in relative security for someone at the hostel. He continued with his politics, however, and he began growing more and more unpopular. He called 2 big transport workers idiots for belonging to a Social Democrat labour union and was rewarded with a beating for his insult. Through 1911 and into 1912, he had a kind of routine. He calmed down on the political front, probably for the best if he didn't want another beating, and instead focused on his paintings. The quality of his work continued to improve. He got on well enough with the other residents, and even the director would chat with him, which was a rare honour at this place. Adolf said of himself at the time, "I learned to orate less, but listen more to those with opinions and objections that were boundlessly primitive." The lesson here for Hitler was clearly that berating people will not make them agree with you. His favourite seat by the window was exclusively reserved for him. Out of respect, no one sat there. He was becoming a part of the furniture there. Adolf sat in the corner painting all day long. A fellow resident later said, "We all lived pretty thoughtlessly through the days. I believe that Hitler was the only one among us who had a clear vision of his future way. He was described by others as a friendly and charming person who kept mostly to himself at this time." Adolf told his old friend Hanich that although he kept being rejected by the art school, he had a new plan. He would head to Munich to finish his studies instead. His time in Vienna was officially coming to an end. This chapter in Mein Kampf would be called Years of Study and Suffering in Vienna, a very accurate title. 5.5 years had been given to this place, and he had nothing to show for it. Hitler claimed it was the hardest, though most thorough, school of my life. On the 24th of May 1913, he took all his possessions in a small bag and left the Mannheim hostel for the last time. Everyone was sorry to see him leave. "We lost a good comrade with him. He understood everyone and helped wherever he could," said Hanich. Adolf spoke about Vienna by saying, "I had set foot in this town while still half a boy, and I left it as a man, grown quiet and grave. In it, I obtained the foundations for a philosophy in general, and a political view in particular, which later I only needed to supplement in detail, but which never left me." And so off he went, leaving Vienna behind. The next time he stepped foot in the city, it would be to rapturous applause when the two countries became one in 1938. His journey took him to Munich. In his mind, he was going to finish his studies, but fate had a very different path in store for him. The next few years of his life would change the world forever. Thank you for watching. Once again, a gigantic thank you to my patrons: Lobster to You, Darway Lololol, Sigmar, Emperor Titus, Luke David Murphy, Chechen Natsok, Cameron, Anton Berglund, Levi E, Lanza, Friendly Brian, Mr. Malabar, and Bushak. We host weekly Hearts of Iron 4 multiplayer games and have a private Patreon Discord. So if this interests you, or if you just want to support me in general to make me doing this full-time possible, please consider becoming a patron.